Hi, this is Dina for Splitcoaststampers. In this tutorial, I have a fun resist technique for you using microglaze. I'm going to start off by prepping my wood piece with gesso. And this is a wooden pumpkin tag that I got at the Dollar Tree. It's unfinished wood, so that layer of gesso is going to allow paint to adhere to the surface without soaking right in. And you may not need gesso on your project, depending on the surface that you use and what medium you use. I decided to just add another layer of gesso here instead of regular paint for my base color. You can choose any two contrasting colors of craft or acrylic paint that you like, and you can do light first and then dark, or dark first then light. Just be sure to use colors that contrast enough so that you can see the effect of the resist after we add the microglaze later. Before we get there though, if there's any stamping or distressing that you want to do to your surface, you'll want to do that before adding the microglaze. So I'm going to add a script background here, and I'm using StazOn pigment ink because I know that will work well over paint and it won't be bothered if I layer more paint over it. So I just inked up the stamp and pressed my piece into the ink, and that gave me nice even coverage. I'm going to use the same ink to go around the edge of the pumpkin with a blender brush too, and again I want to make sure that each layer is dry before I continue on. So heat set that ink if you need to before you move on to the next step. I've got a fun spider web stencil here from a Colorful Life design. I'm going to position that a little bit off center, and next I'm going to grab my microglaze. I've had this little pot for years, and mine is from Judikins, but you might have some that's branded in the distress line from Ranger, and either one will work just fine. I'm using my finger to rub the microglaze through the stencil, and I'm picking up just a small amount at a time. You don't need to have a thick or even layer here. Even a super thin layer will create a resist, so all we're doing here is just rubbing the medium into the open areas of the stencil. And it's going to want to collect in the little corners, and that's okay. It's not really necessary, but it's not going to matter later. I'll take the stencil off and you can see what we've done there. Now every section that's covered with a microglaze is going to resist my next layer of paint. I'm just using cheap craft paint, and I added a bit of water to thin it out. I'm going to brush that gently over the pumpkin, and I don't want to disturb the microglaze by brushing too hard, so the extra water is going to help that paint flow just a little bit easier. Let that layer of paint air dry completely, and then you can use a paper towel or a soft cloth to buff the microglaze out, and that is going to create a smooth protective layer over your piece and give it a little matte sheen. Microglaze is a soft wax paste, and it's usually used to protect an inked or painted surface from water, so here we're using it before and after the fact, and that's pretty cool. Here's another bonus project I started using a mini canvas, and these inks are hybrid inks and they will dry permanently when they're heat set. So they are a great base for this technique as well. I applied the microglaze the same way I did before and brushed white acrylic paint over the panel while my camera was recharging. Then I cut a little mermaid mask out of just regular paper, and I used that for some negative painting. And in negative painting you paint outside the lines, and that reveals the shape that you want to be your focal image. That would actually make a great additional tutorial someday. I'll put that on my list. I added a few more coats of paint until I had the coverage that I wanted. And this will be a fun base for a little mixed media piece someday soon. Those little projects are always fun to do. You can use this technique on paper too. This is watercolor paper that I colored with a dye-based spray. And I applied the microglaze and then sprinkled on some Brusho powders. I sprayed the panel with water, and that activated the powder just in the open areas. And when it was dry, I just buffed the microglaze into the panel. Here's one more quick example, and this is the same dye spray, a small stenciled area, and then another contrasting spray. And because I'm working on paper and the spray soaks in pretty quickly, I'm able to just buff the microglaze right away and even add another layer of stenciling over the top. And that piece got mostly covered up in my sample, but it did make a nice background for this die cut piece. So lots of options and lots of room for experimenting with this medium. And I hope that you have fun with this. Thank you so much for watching.